The Trinity Games are back. And would we say bigger and better? The mountain, the valley, and the lake are at it again. A state-like visit to the opposition bedrock of Nyanza by President William Ruto has gotten tongues wagging and political crystal ball watchers working on overdrive. Then there is that little matter of shareholding that is rocking the political stock exchange. And the lead bellman appears to have his back against the wall of the political securities exchange market. But whether primitive or backward, the stock market bell is ringing loud and clear. And ringing clear too is Jamila's memo that sounds the alarm over some school of theft, somewhere near someone's village in Huisero. And with ghost schools, exam cheating probably makes some sense. Well, that's on Sam's sense. And it is bottom up in the fight against corruption as Kai Kai's kicker delivers the scoreline. Big fish 2, small fish 0. And it's time for a water break. On my take tonight, it is time to consult the national conscience over the shock interdiction of teachers whose only fault was the desire to be safe. The gang is here.
It is primitive and backwards for anybody to imagine that any region of Kenya cannot get development on account of how they voted. That is not right, that is not correct, and I want to assure the people of Kenya that we are going to move together as one nation.
And the gang is here. Lady, gentlemen, what a week this has been. We have seen some big, almost political statements or commitments that have been turned upside their head, and there's been a back and forth over it. So this night we're discussing the company known as Kenya and its shareholding and your stake in it or not, depending on how you voted or not. And that has been the turnaround that we've seen, Sam. So first we're told you have to be a shareholder to benefit from this country. And then we're suddenly told, well, no, but it's actually primitive. Take us through this evolution of how we've gotten to this turnaround of things.
Right. You know, it's very difficult to talk about that because they're actually right, both of them. Because indeed, I would agree that it's not right to divide the country in such a manner, because when a leader is elected, even if it's an MCA at the ward level, if you're elected by, say, because they don't need 50+1 at the MCA level, if you're elected by, say, 40% of the voters in that region, and the remainder of 60% vote for different people, once you win to serve that ward, regardless of who supported you. So that is true. But it is also true that there's a lot of political rewarding that goes on, especially when someone has won an election, whether it is MCA seat, it is MP seat, it is senator, governor, or even the president. And usually it's about payback time, and that has happened in the first year of this administration. So when the president is saying that it is primitive, true, but we must look at what has happened in the first year of that administration. How opportunities allocated. If you look at most of the appointees, they had something to do with the campaign in as far as how did you support in pitching for that campaign. If you look at the cabinet itself, I think about 18, if I'm not mistaken, of those appointees have a political background. They had something to do with it. Those that are not politicians or active politicians, they also had something to do with the campaign itself. So really, if you're to call that rewarding, that the public appointments are part of the rewarding, then it is accurate to say that the people that support a campaign are some of those that get to reap. If you look at the assignment of even the committees of parliament, majority of the people that are heading those committees, they had a big stake in terms of their contribution. So, and I think that's what the Deputy President has been speaking about, that regions that voted will benefit. Indeed, they have. But then again, for how long can that continue to be propagated in a way that sometimes appears not inclusive as the Constitution would require, that the appointments have to be inclusive, they have to be regionally balanced. So I think that's the question that has now to be thrashed out. But we've also seen what the Deputy President has been saying, and I don't know why that continues. So there's a bit of misunderstanding between the two leaders, yet some facets of what they're saying would appear to be to hold true.
So both are true, and the Deputy President is digging his heels in, even as this continues to be a point of conversation. I'm hoping we can get to listen to him now when he talks about, being totally unapologetic about this particular statement.
Your custodian ya shares yenu. Mimi ndio niko hapo. And now tell these people, press, I have no apologies. I am unapologetic to demand and to insist that those who believed in William Ruto and supported him to a man have every right to benefit immensely from his government. I have no apology at all. And if that can bring a problem, so be it. So be it.
All right, so as it appears from that and what Sam was saying is that two things can be true at the same time, which is that it is primitive, backward, but true. This is the reality, Jamila.
It is the reality. When I don't know, I keep remembering that statement of winner takes all. Remember that mentality. It came up during President Uhuru's time, that whoever wins gets everything, and they decide who they'll distribute it to because they've gotten everything. And I was just looking at the numbers of people who voted for William Ruto, 7,176,141, which was 50.49%. And 48.85% who voted for Raila Odinga. And then I'm going to, and I was thinking about the other people who did not vote at all. And then put all that together and look at the number of people who may feel left out by such statements by the Deputy President. When he spoke for the first time, I think it was in February, it really shocked many because here was a government that had come into power. Here was a government that had come into power in this platform of bottom-up, of wananchi wa kawaida, of making people's lives better, from wale wa chini kabisa, mama mboga, mtu wa boda boda. And then it talks about excluding some people of this country who in all essence deserve a government that would provide services to them, a government that will treat them equally. And then now the president's statement, we played it, him talking about being primitive and backward for anyone to imagine that any region of Kenya cannot develop on account of who they voted for, how they voted. And making that statement a categorical one nonetheless in Nyanza, which is a bedrock of opposition politics in this country, Yvonne. That statement was placed to context by many Kenyans who were expressing there was no doubt about who the intended target of the statement was. And this instant, we could say, is the Deputy President, and we had him speaking. And then now this narrative about the government being a private shareholding and the Deputy President has so many times, he's confined his energies to Mount Kenya. He's been there quite a bit. He talks about that region and how they voted for the president and how they even want more percentage of positions in the government than they already have right now. And then now this shareholding narrative, Yvonne, continues on after the recent cabinet reshuffle. I remember when it happened and a few ministers were moved here and there, there was a statement that was made by the Nyeri governor, Mutahi Kahiga. If we have that soundbite, maybe we can listen to it and continue with the conversation.
I will address Moses Kuria, I will address Alice Wahome, I will address Zachary, I will also address Rebecca Miano, and I will also address Professor Ndungu. Any position you hold is not yours. Those are positions belonging to the community, including of Kithure Kindiki and Rinturi. All of you are holding positions in trust for this community that voted for Dr. William Samoei Ruto.
This is speaking from an entirely regional viewpoint, expressing their displeasure about how the cabinet reshuffle was done, Yvonne. And we keep talking about how we need to move on. It's a year later. The government is doing whatever it's doing to try and implement its plan. There have been ups and downs. But we need to move on as a country in terms of now what next. You cannot make people feel excluded just because they did not vote for you or they did not vote at all. And that's a huge chunk of the Kenyan population, Yvonne. Yeah,
I mean, you know, all of these statements then coming up, I think the first time we heard the president repudiating that statement was just recently, after months and months and months of, you know, that statement causing debate. And he said nothing against it until just recently, you know, as part of his countrywide tours. So I have to wonder whether, is this something that he really feels, or was it a statement that was made strategically considering the area that he was visiting? Because, you know, he was in, shall we say, the wider Nyanza region, which has historically been the opposition bedrock in the country. Was this a statement that was being made to the local, you know, population that he was speaking to at the time, and therefore for political sort of expediency at the time, knowing who his audience was at the time? Or is this truly a shift in terms of what the president thinks with this whole winner-takes-all shareholding and who has a right to the government and who doesn't?
I think the Nyanza tour gave the president an opportunity to weigh in on something that he could not have easily processed elsewhere. I do not think this is a statement he would have easily made in front of those crowds in areas perceived to have heavily voted for him.
Right.
And we're talking about places like Mount Kenya and the Central Rift and North Rift, which are his political bases. But now, before this audience in Nyanza, which you've correctly pointed out is the bedrock of opposition politics, one of the concerns has been what is our stake in government and in the work of this drive by the deputy president that the government is a shareholding company. So the opportunity gave itself and to the president to actually weigh in. But I think it's no longer even an issue of where it was said, but how he said it, and the fact that he's pronounced himself on it. Remember, like you've correctly pointed out there, this thing has been on for a while. The deputy president has been saying shareholders for a very long time. I think maybe even immediately after the election, he was already at it. So I see two things here. One is the president genuinely wants to reach out to other places, including the Nyanza region, where he had a very good tour, and I hope we'll get an opportunity to talk about that somewhere down the line. But also, too, could the president also be closing this election long battle? And is the deputy president maybe reminding us of the story of that Japanese soldier called Hiro Onoda, who never knew that the Second World War had ended. And for 29 years, he still continued hiding somewhere in Philippines, believing that the war is still on. So at some point, the electoral contest has to end. And then focus has to be either in governance, but more importantly, in the next election cycle. And here is one thing that has been an enduring fact about this country since 2002. You do not have a single political party or formation that has won elections twice. There's always been a change. And Mwai Kibaki served for 2 terms rather, or 5 years. The first term he served as presidential candidate of the National Rainbow Coalition. The second term, he served as PNU candidate again. And then you go to Uhuru Kenyatta, 2 terms. First term was TNA in a coalition with URP.
Yes.
And then second term, the Jubilee Alliance came
together
as a party.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the realities of the last 4 elections. And there's not been a single election vehicle that has been kept intact from one election to the next. And this alteration come to being. And I think knowing the political player he is, President Ruto is already looking at his options, yes.
Yeah, and you know, it's what you were saying about perhaps seeking to close the election. You know, we've also now had this similar statement to the one the president made from no less than the majority whip. That's MP Sylvanus Osoro. I actually believe he made this statement before the president made his statement.
Yes.
And that was interesting and perhaps a sign of things to come.
Hii kitu ya shares sasa mwache. Wakenya wote tuko ndani ya serikali ya Kenya. Maneno ya kusema unajua hii sehemu shares sijui nini, share yote sisi Wakenya wote tuko ndani ya shares za Kenya. Na sisi wote tunataka kuhusishwa katika kazi ya maendeleo.
Sam?
It's very interesting because if you look at this term about shareholding, is it shareholders or shareholding, there has been more reaction against it more than there has been in terms of those that support. You don't hear a lot of leaders, including from Mount Kenya region, that come and say that they agree with what the Deputy President has been saying. You don't hear them talking about we have more shares than others. They don't say that, at least not openly. And if you recall a few years ago, I think it was in 2016 or thereabout, there was a phrase that the then President coined, tutakula nyama wakimeza mate. I hope I got that right. And it brought a lot of heat, including from the opposition leader then, that is Raila Odinga, and a lot of accusations. But also the leaders within Jubilee at that time were agreeing with that statement, that ukiwinda upate nyama, you eat meat as others wanameza mate. So really, Again, I don't understand why the Deputy President would continue this phrase, which appears not to be getting any positive traction, especially not just outside, but also within the region. But it's something that we have to wait and see how that transforms. And again, does it speak about a disagreement between the President and the Deputy? Because you're wondering, if this is actually a bone of contention, why wouldn't they speak about it by themselves? So when you hear the Deputy President the day after coming out and saying that even if it's going to cause a problem, so be it, what does that point to? Is it that there are tensions, that they are not able to speak to each other to agree when you go to face the public? This is the kind of messaging that we need, especially this time that now they are beyond 1 year in office. What is this telling us? Or
is it just being politically correct? Or rather, not being politically correct, which is what you know, this leadership has been about. We will speak things and say them as they are. And you know, like you said at the beginning, Sam, this is the reality. This is how our politics works. You know, whoever comes in, then shares the spoils. And the Deputy President has been very clear on that. And let's listen to him being extremely plain, you know, about it. You know, you were asking whether it's shareholding or shares. Let's hear from the Deputy President himself.
Kali ni kampuni na ni ya shares. Si ndio? Ni ya shares. Kuna wenye kampuni, wale wako na shares mingi, kuna wale wako na chache, kuna wale hawana. Sasa nyinyi mliinvest kwa hii kampuni ya William Ruto na Rigathi Gachagua. Sasa lazima mvune. Yule ambaye alipanda atafanya nini? Simulipanda? Simuliamuka mapema? Mukasema mutaki kusikia mambo ya ile system na nini? Muka invest, mukapanda, mukapalilia, mukaweka mbolea, mukamwagilia maji, wakati ya kuvuna ndio huu.
So here's a counter to that one, because Raila Odinga did try to explain this issue of shares and exactly who has shares in government. Is it those who invested, who reaped and sowed and tilled and put in manure? Just who are these people who now have shares in government?
Unasema naibu yako ndiye amesema ati hao watu watakuwa naangalia tu, ile kazi yake kukaa pale kuangalia kama gatekeeper. Wewe uko na shangapi? Wewe huna chochote, rudi nyuma. Wewe kuja hapa mbele hapa namna hiyo, na wewe hujakanusha hiyo. Tunampatia wewe wiki moja kukanusha yale maneno haya.
Yvonne, maneno hayo ambaye amesema mara kadhaa, like Linus pointed out, kabla rais azungumze aseme hakuna swala la shareholders. And we kept wondering when the deputy president would speak and the president would not say anything about it, whether he's okay with the statements the deputy president was making. But of course, Linus was saying that maybe imefika wakati wa kusema uchaguzi umeisha. That's what the president is thinking. And again, where he spoke in Nyanza and where it's an opposition stronghold, is important to note that he said it there. And someone else who spoke about this while in Nyanza was CS Moses Kuria, if we have that, because Gituk was saying leaders from central Kenya have also spoken out about this shareholder thing, not for, but against. Maybe if we listen to Moses Kuria.
Mimi nafanya Kenya mzima. Vile Osoro amesema ni muunge mkono. Kwa nini nafanya Kenya mzima? Sababu ya mazao yenu na ushuru ambao mnalipa. Kila Mkenya ni shareholder. Mkenya wote ni shareholder katika serikali ya William Samoei Ruto. Na tunataka tusonga mbele, tusonge pamoja.
I hope I'm not mistaken. I think that may have been in Siaya, but I may be wrong. But he spoke there to that crowd that, hey, you're all also part of this government.
Again, choice of venue, no?
Choice of venue, very important. But then now, Yvonne, despite that, despite what the president said, despite what Moses Kuria said and Osoro, and that there are people from the Kenya Kwanza administration who spoke, the deputy president remained on the same issue about shareholders. And in fact, this time, he actually went into figures. He talked about stocks and numbers. Maybe we listened to the shares, the percentages from what the deputy president said.
Make sure that we increase our shareholding in his government from 47% to almost 60%. Many people are uncomfortable about our shareholding. Ni kidogo is only 47. 27 tutaiongeza itakuwa mingi zaidi.
I mean, hey.
Okay, so help me understand, this 47% shareholding, how is this arrived at?
You'd need to
you're the numbers man, Sam. So 47%. Yeah. Would you want to go to the screen and do a data point on this? So it's 47%. What is this? And then increasing it to 60%. What does this mean? Is it the people who voted? So now saying in 2027 you have more people from the region voting. Is it?
That's a very
composition in cabinet?
A very important question. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer because, I mean, for you to know the owners of a company, the directors or even the shareholders, you'd have to inspect the books of that company. And here's the thing. It is unfortunate that it's getting to this point, that we're actually debating whether we are a company or we are not, because it is also important that even in a limited company or whatever the model of formation there is, if you're a shareholder, you don't just reap the benefits. You also account for the losses. So you bear the burden. You have the responsibility of baking that cake that has to be sold and share the profits, which will be shared either to reinvest in the company or you take whatever benefits you want to share back to the shareholders in form of dividends. So it's not just about harvesting. Yes, you may win an election. You may want to allocate positions, but there's a bigger responsibility about steering a country, steering an economy, which I also find it suspect when people start saying that every Kenyan is a shareholder. What are we then talking about? Because remember, just recently we had serious conversations in this country about the finance bill of 2023, how the public debt is going and how we need to raise more revenue, that big word, fiscal consolidation. And it appears that when it's that point, then it's a responsibility of every Kenyan. Right. So what happens to this, what I would describe as a double speak? Because if indeed it's about shareholders, how about then the shareholders take the responsibility, but also as they benefit, they're also baking that cake. So really, we have to distinguish that. It's either the country is a shareholding company or it's not. If it is not, I mean, just manage the country based on the responsibilities of the Constitution, not really this are the rhetoric.
Yeah, and you remember the rhetoric during the campaigns, as Jamila was saying, was, this is going to be an administration that deals with hustlers. And at that point, it wasn't about which community or which region, contributed the most. So at that point, Kenyans were all united under the banner of hustlers. And then after the election, then now we're told, okay, so there's shareholding. So where is the place of the hustler, in this shareholding structure? But then, many people said, okay, what the president said was, directly against or addressing the statements that had been made by his deputy, and many starting to read maybe a lot more into what's happening. Is this an idea of backroom deals that are not, happening, or a relationship that seems to be breaking down? And, leaders, it reminds me of the time, right here on this very table many, many years ago, when we started to speak about then what seemed to be a parting of ways between then President Uhuru Kenyatta and then Deputy President William Ruto. And of course, there was much uproar about it, that there was nothing there. This was all a figment of our imagination. This was a creation of the media. And it, very soon started to point itself there. Now, I'm not asking us to speculate on whether, what this means, and, a very public, difference of opinion on this matter. But what happens next? Now they seem to be speaking at cross purposes, even if they're not speaking directly against each other. But so what do we make of, all of this now? And does this finally put this matter to rest? Is this now the moment when we start to move forward past the election, a year on, and now in the second year of this administration?
Let's put it this way, Yvonne. If Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua handles his term as Deputy President the same way Deputy President William Ruto handled his term as Deputy President, then we'll have that sign on the road that says, accident ahead.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it's the nature of politics. Politics, and President speaks about primitive and backwards. There's something about politics that is almost comparable to a kraal of cows, and I speak about this with the authority of my background. I've dealt with cows, and one thing that is enduring in a cattle kraal is there'll only be one bull at a time. You don't come with the constitution saying, like Kahiga was saying, we elected a ticket of 2. Because what are you saying? Are you saying in the same way that the perceptions that were there, that, Uhuru and Ruto was a ticket of equals, and now you are almost suggesting the same thing with the Ruto-Gachagua ticket? I think this is the problem that was occasioned by the change of the constitution in 2010 that brought the ticket. And the ticket has now come with a bit of, I don't know what to call it, but political credit claiming that almost then results in a clash where now you have people saying, no, but we elected a ticket of 2. But only one is president, the other one is deputy. And there's something politics abhors, and that is the competition of any form, especially at the same level. There should be one boss. And I think this is one message that should come out early in this term for problems of the other 10 years, Uhuru, Ruto, to be avoided. Where, you remember the deputy president then saying, Mimi na rais. If they do that Mimi na rais thing again right now, there'll be a problem. Because there is no such thing as Mimi na rais. We compared this form of the presidency with that of the US. And look, the moment an election is concluded, there is a president and there is a vice president. And one has to be president and the other has to be a vice president. Meaning even in terms of profile, in terms of the public statements that they make, you only make statements to support or
your boss, yeah.
Or to support your boss, not to speak as if you are suggesting you know, the alternative path. You are not, as deputy president, an alternative until your boss is not there. And that is the rule of the top two, whether it's in America or more even in our context, where political egos are more raw. So, and look at how this shareholding has played out, and everyone has been interpreting, especially the media. So you wait when the president speaks, he says something about shareholding, and then you wait for what Gachagua is saying. Now it becomes an exchange, actually. It becomes an exchange. And politically, that breeds some friction, because it's a lot of interpretation that goes on. Look at how Mutahi Kahiga, the governor of Nyeri, who is considered a close ally of the deputy president, appeared to, not appeared, but actually sounded very unhappy with the, with the cabinet reshuffle. Yeah. So is that how it's going to go? That, you know, somehow the deputy will be checking his boss. His boss. And his boss's decisions. And his boss's decisions. That will bring in tension. But I think for now, let's say, maybe it's early. It's only a year. There's a lot of interpretation that going into everything that we see. I saw somewhere people trying to do a body language read of the people in the room in the Kisumu State House. Yes. And you know, I mean, we are a heavy political news consumption environment. And there are a lot of analysts, and they can read a lot of things. But there are those basic rules. Politics is a very egotistic space, and especially power politics. Once there is a boss, let there be one, and then there is one below him, and the rest that way. Okay, yeah. Here's another basic rule, and which is that we have to take a break here on the program right now. We are coming back, and we will focus a little bit more on the president's tour of the Nyanza region. It's been part of his tour across the country, where he's holding cabinet meetings in the various regions that he visits. And this past week, he has been in the Nyanza region. By the way, not only was he talking about this shareholding thing being primitive and backwards, he also did extend a hand backwards to his predecessor. We'll be talking about that and a lot more. And the ODM, shall we call them rebel MPs, or those who are, you know, choosing to work with whoever they want to work with. We'll talk about that and what it means here on NewsGang when we return.